Magandang umaga, ako po si Prince Brian Ordaneza
Ako po si Ellen May Oclaret.
Ako po si Catherine S. Udi.
at tatalakayin namin ang tatlong bersyon ng Cavite Mutiny na naganap noong 1872. Before we formally start our discussion, here are the learning objectives. By the end of the lesson, the learner should be able to identify and understand the three versions of Cavite Mutiny. To find out the persona or individuals involved in Cavite Mutiny, to distinguish the difference among three versions, and to finally find out the consequences of Cavite Mutiny. The 1872 Cavite Mutiny was a significant event in Philippine history marked by Filipino soldiers and workers rebelling against the Spanish colonial rule. Centered in the Cavite arsenal, the mutiny aimed to overthrow the Spanish authorities and achieve Filipino independence. The Cavite Mutiny has three versions, and along the way, we will discuss each of these versions. The Spanish version of Cavite Mutiny of 1872 was written by the Spanish historian Jose Montero y Vidal in his book entitled Historia General de Filipinas. Jose Montero y Vidal highlighted the significant event as an attempt of the Indios to overthrow the Spanish government in the Philippines. Meanwhile, in Rafael de Izquierdo's official report, it magnified the event and made use of it to involve the native clergy, which was then active for the call for secularization. The secularization movement in the Philippines under the Spanish colonial administration from the 18th to late 19th century advocated for greater rights for native Filipino Catholic clergymen. So, secularization is indeed a kind of move to have a good authority done by Filipino. However, because of this, Gomburza was tagged as masterminds of the Cavite Mutiny. Spaniards Jose Montero Vidal and Rafael Izquierdo highlighted various reasons for the revolution. First in our list is the abolition of privileges. Spaniards point out the abolition of privileges enjoyed by workers at the Cavite arsenal, such as exemption from tribute payments and forced labor, as a primary cause. Next is the influence of external events. The Spanish Revolution, which resulted in the overthrow of secular throne, is cited as an external influence on the situation in the Philippines. Next is the propaganda and literature. The spread of democratic, liberal, and republican ideas through books, pamphlets, and unrestrained press is noted as contributing to unrest and dissent among Filipinos. And most importantly, the presence of the native clergy who have resentment against the Spanish friars conspired and supported the rebels and enemies of Spain. Rafael Izquierdo y Gutierrez was a Spanish military officer, politician, and statesman. He served as Governor General of the Philippines from April 4, 1871 to January 8, 1873. He was the Governor General during the 1872 Cavite Mutiny, which led to the execution of 41 of the mutineers, including the Gomburza martyrs. Rafael Izquierdo reported to the King of Spain that the rebels wanted to overthrow the Spanish government to install a new hari in the likes of native clergy. The general even added that the native clergy enticed other participants by giving them charismatic assurance that their fight will not fail because God is with them, coupled with handsome promises of rewards such as employment, wealth, and ranks in the army. Izquierdo in his report also criticized Indios as gullible and possessed a natural inclination for stealing. Jose Montero y Vidal and Rafael Izquierdo deemed that the event of 1872, or the Cavite Mutiny, was planned earlier and was thought of a big conspiracy among educated leaders, mestizos, abogadillos or native lawyers, residents of Manila and Cavite, and the native clergy. They indicated that the conspirators of Manila and Cavite planned to liquidate high-ranking Spanish officers to be followed by the massacre of the friars. According to the accounts of the two Spaniards, on January 20, 1872, the district of Sampaloc in Manila celebrated the feast of the Virgin of Loreto. Unfortunately, participants of the feast celebrated the occasion with the unusual fireworks displays. Allegedly, those in Cavite mistook the fireworks as the sign for the attack, and just like what was agreed upon, the 200-man contingent, headed by Sergeant Lamadrid, who led the revolt, launched an attack targeting Spanish officers at sight and seized the arsenal. When the news reached the iron-fisted Governor Izquierdo, he rudely ordered the reinforcement of the Spanish forces in Cavite to suppress the revolt. The revolution was easily crushed when the expected reinforcement from Manila did not come ashore. Major instigators, including Sergeant Lamadrid, were killed in the fight, while the Gomburza were tried by the court-martial and were sentenced to die by strangulation or garrote. Patriots of Mutiny like Joaquin Pardo de Tavera, Antonio Maria Regidor, Jose and Pio Basa, and other abogadillos were suspended by the Audiencia or High Court from the practice of law, arrested, and were sentenced with life imprisonment at the Marianas Island, which was then a colony of Spain. On February 17, 1872, in an attempt of the Spanish government and Fray Lucrancia or friars to instill fear among the Filipinos so that they may never commit such a daring act again, the Gomburza were executed by strangulation or garrote. This event was indeed tragic, but served as one of the moving forces that shaped the Filipino nationalism. So in conclusion, the Cavite Mutiny in Spanish version is an attempt of the Indios and those liberal thinkers of Filipino and the Filipino clergy to overthrow the Spanish government in the Philippines.
Ako po si Ellen May Oclaret at ngayon tatalakayin natin ang pag-aasa sa Cavite o mas kilala bilang the Cavite Mutiny, a Philippine version. So, what is the Filipino version all about? So, the Philippine version is written by Dr. Trinidad H. Pardo de Tavera, a Filipino scholar and a Filipino researcher. According to Dr. Pardo de Tavera, the Cavite Mutiny was a merely mutiny by the Filipino soldiers and laborers of the Cavite arsenal. So, the Filipino soldiers and laborers revolted in the Cavite arsenal. So, let's just recap what was the Cavite arsenal all about. So, it is a storage of all the armaments of the Spanish government. So, the Filipino was dissatisfied from a draconian policies of General Izquierdo. So, he is the Governor General of the Philippines during that time. So, as we remember, we were under Spanish government, and by that, General Izquierdo was managing the Philippine island. So, when he arrived here in the Philippines, he introduced a policy that contains the abolition of privileges that the Philippine soldiers and laborers and Cavite arsenal enjoyed. The removal of the privileges of the Filipino troops and workers at the Cavite arsenal there were two. So the first is the exemption from the tribute, or in a way, of taxation. So General Izquierdo abolished this privilege to the Filipino troops or soldiers and laborers. So tributo was imposed as a sign of the Filipinos' loyalty to the Spanish king, and those individuals who paid tribute were individuals between 16 to 60 years old. Simula sa taong 1572 hanggang 1884, ang mga tao ay nagbabayad kada taon ng 8 reals o equivalent sa ₱1 kada taon. So, ang value na perang ito noon ay malaki, hindi katulad ngayon. So, marami ring paraan upang makapagbayad ang isang tao sa pamamagitan ng ginto, manok, mga bigas, bulak at marami pa. Pangalawa naman ay ang pag-abolish ni General Izquierdo sa exemption from labor force. So, all male Filipinos from 18 to 60 years old of age were required to give their free labor, called polo, to the government. So, this labor was for 40 days a year, reduced to 15 days in 1884, also called polo e servicios. So these individuals ranging from 18 to 60 years old were obligated to do work such as constructions of buildings, building churches, and even cutting trees to make logs. The workers there were called pulestas. Uprising of a military personnel of Fort San Felipe or the Spanish arsenal in Cavite, Philippines on January 20, 1872. Around 200 soldiers and laborers rose up in the belief that it would elevate to a national uprising. The mutiny was unsuccessful, and government soldiers executed many of the participants. If there's a rebellion, mayroon talagang itinuturing na pasingulo o mga masterminds. Kaya naman, nadawit ang Gumborza fathers. So, they were tagged as the masterminds of the Cavite Mutiny. So, isipin natin na ang mga pare na ito ay nasa kanilang mga simbahan upang magdasal. But all of a sudden, they were tagged as the masterminds of this movement. There were prominent Filipino priests charged with treason and sedition. The Spanish clergy connected the priests to the mutiny as part of a conspiracy to stifle the movement of secular priests who desired to have their own parishes instead of being assistants to the regular friars or the Spanish friars. Father Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora, collectively known as Majuha or Gomborza fathers. So they were charged with treason and sedition. And in that time, sa panahong iyon, may tinatawag silang sekularasyon kung saan ninanais sa mga paring Pilipino na magkaroon ng sariling simbahan, otoridad at ang mga paring ito ay aktibo sa sekularasyong ito. Ating pakakatandaan na noon tayo kontrolado ng mga Spanish friars dito sa Pilipinas. So, ang mga paring ito ay medyo active sa sekulasyong ito. At dahil dyan, sila ay nadawit. They were sentenced both into trials, and lastly, they experienced naigarote. So, garote is killing someone by strangulation, typically with an iron wire or cord. Hindi po pinuputol ang ulo sa garote. On February 1782, the Gomborza were executed in Bagong Bayan by garote in public to serve as a threat to all Filipinos never to attempt to fight the Spaniards. Again, this is a scene perpetratedly witnessed by the young Jose Rizal. So, this is a Spaniard sending a message to us, the Filipinos, that we should not be in their way or else we will experience garote.
Ako po si Catherine S. Uding at ako ay mag-uulat patungkol sa opisyal na report ni General Izquierdo. So, government documents. Official government documents from the Spanish colonial administration provide a realistic perspective on the Cavite Mutiny. These documents typically consist of court records, military reports, and official proclamations issued by the Spanish authorities. They detail the events leading up to the mutiny, the arrest and trial of the mutineers, and the subsequent imposition of harsh punishments, including executions and deportations. Government documents often downplay or dismiss Filipino grievances, portraying the mutiny as a criminal conspiracy rather than a legitimate protest. So the official report of General Izquierdo will be discussed. So Rafael Geronimo Cayetano Izquierdo y Gutierrez was a Spanish military officer, politician, and statesman. He served as a Governor-General of the Philippines from April 1871 to January 1873. So there are excerpts from his official report. So Governor Izquierdo's report was an official document submitted to the king, informing him of a rebellion that occurred in Cavite. The mutiny started on January 28, 1872 when around 200 Filipino soldiers rebelled at the artillery barracks in Cavite. The mutineers took control of the barrack, shouting for independence and liberty from Spanish rule, and blaming the Cavite mutiny on the native clergy, some local residents, intellectual, and even the El Eco Filipino. Significantly, he calls the military mutiny an insurrection, an uprising, and a revolution. From the summary of information received, that is, from the declaration made before the fiscal, it seems definite that the insurrection was motivated and prepared by the native clergy, the mestizos, and the native lawyers, and by those known here as the abogadillos, some residents from Manila, others from Cavite, and some from the river provinces. So there are reasons of the Cavite mutiny. So first is the instigators who carry out their criminal project protested against the injustice of government in not paying the provinces for their tobacco crop and against the usury. It also injustice of having obliged a worker in the Cavite arsenal to pay tribute starting January 1 to render personal services from which they were formerly exempted. So persuading the Indios to join them that the chief of state would be Hari, an ecclesiastic, a priest or a member of clergy or ordained from religious duties. He added to his report that the mutineers in Manila and Cavite planned to liquidate high-ranking Spanish officials and would plan to form a government, monarchy or republic. Up to now, it has been not clearly determined if they plan to establish a monarchy or a republic, because the Indios have no word in their language to describe this different form of government, whose head in Tagalog would be called Hari, but it turns out they would place at the head of the government a priest, and there were great probabilities that the head selected would be Jose Burgos and Jacinto Zamora, a priest in San Pedro Cathedral. All the Spaniards, including the friars, would be executed except for the women and their belongings confiscated. Foreigners would be respected. This uprising has roots, and with them were affiliated to a great extent the regiments of the infantry and artillery, many civilians, and a large number of mestizos, Indios, and some ilustrados from the provinces. So to start the revolution, they planned to set fire to the district of Tondo. Once the fire is set, the revolution would begin. However, they mistook the fireworks display as a sign for the start of rebellion. On January 1872, a mutiny in the Spanish naval base of Fort San Felipe Neri at the Cavite Puerto, which is now the Cavite City, happened. It began when they misinterpreted that the fireworks from the feast of Our Lady of Loreto in Sampaloc, Manila, were rockets signaling the rebellion. Around 200 people were involved, composed of Filipino soldiers, marine sailor workers, and some Cavite residents. They were headed by Sergeant Lamadrid, a native of Bicol. The mutiny was staged just as most of the Spanish forces in the Philippines were preoccupied by the operation against the Muslims in Cebu. Lamadrid hoped that other Filipino units stationed in Manila would also rise and take over the defenses of Intramuros. Several Spanish officials were either taken as hostages or killed. Upon receiving the information about the mutiny, Governor General Rafael D. Izquierdo immediately mustered a force under General Felipe Genoves to reinforce the Spanish defensive positions and contingent of the Spanish Marines, so preempting the impending advance to Manila. The revolution was easily crushed by the Spanish forces that was ordered to be reinforced by Governor General Izquierdo, and when the expected reinforcement from Manila did not come. So the following morning, the rebels retreated to Fort San Felipe Neri owing to the advance of never Filipino regiments. On January 22, the Spaniards outnumbered mutineers and regained the control of the fort. After an hour of fighting, instigators, including Sergeant Lamadrid, died during the siege. So Spanish authorities initiated an intense manhunt, arrested leaders and members of the uprising, identified several liberal personalities, both in the church and society. Izquierdo reported to Madrid the involvement of the aforesaid liberals. while historian Jose Montero y Vidal claimed that the uprising was an attempt to overthrow the Spaniards. All in all, 52 were sentenced to death, but 39 of the number were later reduced to life imprisonment. Others were banished to the Marianas. The incident happened while Spain was under the Republican leaders promoting liberalism, yet progressiveness was suppressed. Secularization of Philippine churches affected. On 17 February 1872, the public witnessed how the Gumburza were sentenced to death by Garrote at Bagumbayan, Manila. Despite being a witness, Zaldúa was not spared the death sentence. Jose Rizal, in his dedication of El Filibusterismo, remarked that the only God knows if the three martyred priests were innocent of the accusation to them.
In conclusion, the Cavite Mutiny of 1872 was a significant event in Philippine history, marking a pivotal moment in country's struggle for independence from Spanish colonial rule. While the mutiny itself was quickly suppressed, its aftermath led to the widespread repercussions, including the execution of prominent Filipino nationalists known as the Gumburza Priests. This event fueled further resistance against Spanish oppression and contributed to the growth of nationalist sentiments among Filipinos, eventually culminating in the Philippine Revolution of 1896. The Cavite Mutiny serves as a reminder of the resilience and determination of the Filipino people in their quest for freedom and self-determination.